When you want to include texture in your clay piece, the first thing you need to make sure you do is double check that your clay is still fairly wet or plastic. You want to make sure it's soft so that it's able to take in the texture. If it's too hard, you might end up breaking your project. So there are three different types of textures that we have been talking about. We have been talking about additive texture, incised texture, and also impressed texture. And I'm going to show you how you can create some of these textures, though there is an infinite amount of ways that you can create these textures with very simple tools. So for starters, we're going to start with some impressed texture. And when we talk about impressed texture, we're thinking about creating pressure. So impressed, pressing into our clay. So it can be an actual design tool that you can find in the art room, or you can use random tools that you already have to make circles. Like at the end of this tool, I got a permanent marker that makes some interesting designs, but it also has a different design on its opposite side. Or things as simple as like a clothespin, and this kind of makes little tracks, or it can create some other type of detail in your work. So it doesn't have to be a very complicated type of design, but you can use some simple things that you find around the house, around the classroom, to create some interesting impress textures. If you do also want to, you could even use your own fingers or your nails and create a kind of texture in that way. So impressed, pressing into the clay. The second one that I want to talk about is called additive texture, and that is essentially when you are taking a piece of clay. So I'm just going to cut it from over here just for this example, and you score and slip on the opposite side. So I would take my scoring tool, or a fork works out really well, or a needle tool works out just fine, making sure that I press, get an idea of where my piece is going to be, so then when I press it in, it's going to stay where I want it to go. So the key is to make sure that you are making it one piece of clay, and by adding some slip, getting that worked in there. I got some water here that works out okay as long as I press it in really well. Apply some good pressure, not so much that I lose my shape, but enough that it squishes it together and gets rid of any air that might be in between. If I end up having to roll a really skinny coil to help blend it in, I can. If I want to take one of my tools or even my fingers and actually blend this in, that helps keep it together as well. So additive texture is essentially creating a design by adding clay to your piece. All right. And then the last type of texture actually has two different ways that you can create it. It is called incised texture, or making an incision, or making a cut. So creating your pattern or design or texture with a series of cuts. And I have a ribbon tool here. It's called a ribbon tool because it creates these ribbons of clay when I pull it away. So this is a tool that you don't press all the way into the clay, you press just a little bit, and it creates sort of like a little channel kind of design. You can repeat short strokes over and over again to create sort of a rougher texture, or the illusion of maybe fur. The loop right here comes in a lot of different shapes, triangles, squares, skinny, fat, whatever. And this tool can easily be replicated with like a paper clip that's taped onto a dowel or some type of stick. Works out really nice as well. And the other way that you can create that incise texture is actually taking your knife or your fettling tool and cutting out your pieces from your clay. Now, these pieces that you actually cut out, I'm going to lift this up so I can poke this out a little bit easier. These pieces that you cut out, you actually could take them and then add onto your project as additive texture, or you can save these pieces of clay that you cut away and save it for a later project, save it for another part, but just making sure that doesn't get all dried out. So these can be still used or wadded up and saved in a plastic bag. So that is how we create our three different types of texture. We got our impress, so pressing into the clay. We have our additive, adding clay to create some sort of design or texture. And then we also have our incise texture, which is created by carving or cutting through our clay. So those are 3 different types. I encourage you guys to experiment with these with your clay projects to make them more interesting if your exterior is very simple.